Hello, welcome to the Businesses Start Here podcast. As you're going to see in today's episode, we met with John Chapman, who started a business about 10 months ago where he purchased an existing franchise and had a lot of challenges with that and is still working through some of those. But he talks with us about some of the personnel challenges as well as some of the other challenges he went through and the night that he told his wife what to do in the event that he died because the business killed him. So be sure to stay tuned and listen to the podcast. It's a great one. And thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you after the episode.
Welcome to the Businesses Start Here podcast, hosted by David Vigliotti and Vigliotti and Associates. We're here to talk with business owners and business experts to inspire and encourage entrepreneurs.
John, thanks for being here today. We appreciate you coming in and taking some time out of your schedule to talk to us. So to get started, why don't you just give us a little bit about your background, how you got to where you are, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, so my name's John Chapman. Thanks for having me, Dave. I really appreciate it. It's an honor. I guess I would call myself a serial entrepreneur. I've always, ever since I was a kid, had a passion to try to sell something to somebody and be involved in some kind of business venture. Mm-hmm. And that has led to a series of basically sales positions in my career. I'm 50 years old now, and if you were to look at my resume, you would say, wow, this guy's moved around a lot. And I have. And I honestly always felt a little guilty about that, you know, because I have friends who have had jobs like the same job from when they graduated from college till today, or, you know, maybe one or two jobs. And you've got me who's had 10. And I always felt like, man, what's wrong with me? Like, can I just not figure out the career that I want? Am I just, you know, uncertain in life? And the reality was that I was always trying to scratch an itch, and it was the entrepreneurial itch. Yeah. So ever since I was a kid, I've enjoyed providing a service to somebody that I know is going to help them, whether it was knocking on doors as a kid and selling stuff out of magazines, or my first job in college, out of college, which was a television reporter, or, you know, a multitude of sales positions after that. I've always had a desire to help people solve problems, and which leads me to where I am now. I, within the last 10 months, have purchased a franchise called Home Instead. Home Instead is a senior home care company. It's a franchise that's worldwide, about 1,200 offices worldwide. In the U.S., there's about 650 offices. And I had the opportunity to purchase the franchise right here in Washington County, where I live, Pennsylvania, and did that about 10 months ago. And we service all of Washington County, a little bit of a couple other counties, and we have a client base of about 50 clients and an employee base of about 60 employees. So that's what I'm doing now. And honestly, that itch that I've been trying to scratch for the last 50 years has finally been scratched. You know, I'm in a place where I own my own business now, where I'm able to really find fulfillment in the service that I'm able to provide to the clients that we serve, and maybe just as important, in fact, definitely just as important, the employees that I serve. So I've found great pleasure in being able to provide a product that's changing lives with my clients, but also create a culture in my business that's changing lives, and that's the lives of my employees. So that's what I'm doing now.
That's great. Our tagline is Vigliotti and Associates, life changing. So we're
awesome.
So we have pretty good synergy there.
Yeah.
Because I think that itch. It may not even be really an entrepreneurship itch. I think a big piece of it is, and I think it's typical of most entrepreneurs to bounce around a lot. But I think probably the life changing thing is really where that itch is scratched. Because I know for me personally, all the jobs I had, I wasn't as connected to the mission, because the mission, I worked for an oil and gas company. I don't know who the customers are. I don't know how we're changing lives. I'm sure we were better or worse, whatever you feel about that industry. I just didn't see it. But I think probably what you're seeing now is you have so much control over how those lives are changed that's probably the biggest place where that itch is getting scratched.
Yeah, it's been really remarkable, honestly. I'll be honest with you. When I bought the business 9-10 months ago, I was in a position where I purchased an existing franchise. So it had been established. They had a footprint in Washington County, but it was being operated as part of another franchise as well. So it was almost like there were two franchises being operated as one,
Okay.
which was kind of unheard of in the in the industry and in the company. I should say in the company. And when they bifurcated those, and I purchased the one, it proved to be very challenging because the migration of data didn't go quite as planned. I inherited some employees that maybe needed to be addressed immediately.
Right.
Culturally, I felt like there were some things that I needed to address right away. And I remember probably within the first 3 months, Dave, laying in bed, my wife's next to me, and I said, Libby, my wife, I said, Libby, if I don't make it, you need to know what to do in case I die. I was feeling so heavy-hearted and anxious and just burdened with everything that was going on. I'm like, what have I done?
Right.
And I'm thinking, I don't know that my body is going to be able to take it. And in all seriousness, I told her that. I'm like, here's what you got to do. And she's like, no, you're not leaving.
You're not allowed.
Right, exactly. And so, but it's funny how I'm a Christian, so I really surrendered that time of my life to the Lord, and I'm like, man, I recognized that I had the unique opportunity to be a part of making some major changes that were going to be awesome for me, but more importantly, were going to be awesome for my employees and my clients.
Yeah.
And to your point, it was an opportunity to make a huge difference. So about month 3, I started to make some significant changes with our culture where it impacted the way we hired, it impacted the way we interacted as a team, it impacted the way that we were coaching our caregivers to relate to our clients, and really creating or trying to create a family atmosphere within our organization. There's a guy that I highly respect. His name's Andy Stanley, who is a pastor, and he said a quote that, or he made a statement that I've kind of taken on as a life quote for me. He said, "The value of a life is always measured by how much of it you give away." The value of a life is always measured by how much of it that you give away. And that's become my life motto.
Yeah.
I really believe that when we consider, okay, how much of what I've been given, my gifts, my talents, my treasure, how much of that can I use to impart to others and impact others' lives? When we look at our lives through that lens,
Right.
now we're talking about making some serious, impacting, life-changing actions. And so I've actually instilled that in my company. Everybody on my team has a little plaque on their desk that says that quote. So they're reminded daily, it's about what we're giving away to our caregivers, to our clients, to their families. We're here to make a difference. And you're right. I think that's what I've tapped into. Finally, I'm like, man, it feels so good to scratch that itch.
Right.
It's like, okay, I'm making a difference. I love what I do, but I'm really making a difference here, not just in the clients that I serve, but the team that we've assembled. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few times the culture change that you had to make. So you gave one example where you put the plaque up to get that, just hammer it home. And we did kind of a similar thing. We have on our wall, we have our core values in every office in here.
Yeah.
What are some of the other kind of tactical things or repeatable things that maybe you've done for that culture?
Yeah, that's great. Great question. I had the opportunity as part of my background to work with a gentleman. His name's John Stalwart. He wrote a book called The Serving Leader. Actually, he's from the Pittsburgh area. Phenomenal man, phenomenal leader. Wrote this international bestseller called The Serving Leader. And he had partnered with somebody locally here to start a company that really was developed to provide his leadership training services to CEOs and executives across the world.
Okay.
And so I had the opportunity to kind of be in a business development role with him. So I was rubbing shoulders with this guy and getting to hear him share what was important in terms of building a thriving culture. And a few things that I took away, you know, when you're around somebody like that, you just kind of absorb what they're saying. And a few things that I took away are, one, that message is always in front of your team. Whenever you're addressing your team, whenever I'm addressing my team, I'm always saying that quote. The value of a life is always measured by how much of it is given away. And then I encourage us as a team to talk about that. What are we doing as a team to give of ourselves to make a difference in the lives of our caregivers and the lives of the clients and families that we serve? So just making that message constantly in front of people. And it goes beyond that plaque on the desk. It goes beyond that sign on the wall. You know, when you walk into a company and you see their mission statement, that's great, but are they living it out?
Right.
When you're putting that in front of your team every day, every conversation, it makes a difference. So that's the first thing. The second thing is tell stories. You know, when somebody in your organization is resembling that mission statement or that, you know, that the value, one of the values that you have, talk about it. You know, like, hey, this caregiver exemplified that message by doing this last week. And not just talk about it among your team, but like broadcast that to everybody in your organization so that they're seeing that you're recognizing the value of that mission statement or that, you know, that statement that you guys have as a company. Yeah. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing is personally really modeling it, you know, having that mindset in me that I'm with my team in my office, with any caregiver that I'm talking to, with any family that I'm talking to, I am living that out. I'm actually demonstrating that so that it's not just lip service and it's not just a plaque on the wall. It's truly my life that's reflecting that. And we have an orientation that we have every week where we bring in new caregivers. And the very first thing we do is I go in and I share my heart. You know, I'm putting it out there. We show a video that is talking about the company that I work for, and or that's the franchise, and it talks about the value of being a caregiver. And every time, Dave, I cry. Every time. It's because it's who I am, right. And the caregivers see that. My team sees that, so they know he's putting his money where his mouth is, and I think that's super important to model what it is we say we represent.
Yeah, I think that's probably the key to all of it is it's not just something you say, right? It's who you are, really. That's right. I don't know how long ago you heard that quote from your pastor, but it's changed your life, it sounds like. So it's really become a part of you. So a lot of times you'll see someone come up with a mission statement and you can tell they don't really believe it.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the key, is just be authentic. And being a leader, I think you hear it all the time, you have to be an authentic leader. You have to be yourself. That doesn't mean you're just an open book and you let all of your craziness come out, but you have to be who you are. Mm-hmm. So that's really good. It made me feel good because I think we do at least two of the three pretty well. We have a staff meeting where every week we talk about one of our core values and how people exemplified it. So that as you were talking, I was like, check. I think me modeling it at times, it's easy to get frustrated with a client, obviously, and things like that. So that's something that I've been working on to at least not show that to the team, to kind of try to internalize it more.
Well, and it's funny because I even tell people when they come in for orientation, listen, I bought the company 9 months ago, and I'm just being honest with you, we're not where I want to be, you know, in terms of our culture. I will say we've moved the needle.
Right.
But we're not where we want to be. We inherited some real challenges that I felt like needed addressed, whether that was folks that were working for us that maybe it was just a job for them, and you know, so there were some turnover issues we were dealing with. There were some call-offs, things like that just were unacceptable. And when I got right down to it, it really was a culture issue. You know, there were people working for us that weren't invested. And so initially I needed to make some changes, but I always tell caregivers when they're in that orientation, listen, we're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. You'll see failures. You'll see me make mistakes. Just ask my team in the office. But when the day is over, I want it to be our heart that we are about making a difference and that we are truly changing lives. And if that's where we can end every day, I'm good with it. You know, even if we make little mistakes along the way and we have to course correct occasionally, it's okay.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and just understand your heart that if you make a mistake, it's not ill intent, right?
Yeah.
It's just you're doing the best you can. We're human.
Yeah.
Things happen, and just making sure that they know that they have the grace to make mistakes, so you expect them to give you grace to make mistakes.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And one thing I want to go back to is your faith. So
Yeah.
I'm a Christian as well, and I think all the time, I don't know how an entrepreneur can survive without their faith. Because there's so many things that, I mean, you experienced it, 2 months in, that you're like, why in the world would I do this? I experience it pretty regularly. I'm sure you still have moments where, where
Just
you
last
were
night, my wife and I were having a conversation. I'm like, man, are we sure this is what we, you know? But yeah, go ahead.
I know in the first year, my wife and I probably talked 3 or 4 times about, should I go find a job? And I think just having that clear vision, again, for me, it was faith that God called me to do this, so that's what I need to keep doing no matter what it looks like. But it gets hard, right? Like, there's not, I tell people all the time, in the same day, you can feel like you were born to do this, and you can feel like, why am I even here? I have no skill. I was talking to my wife last night about we're making some major changes to how we do our taxes, and I was like, it's kind of funny, like, what qualifications do we have to run a business? Like, we're making these major changes and decisions that are affecting 300 and some people. Like, who are we to even be able to do this? But again, for us at least, it's rooted in our faith that God called us to do this, and He's equipping us to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And my wife is a woman of faith. I mean, just puts me to shame in terms of, you know, my ability to be able to just say, okay, God, you know, I trust you.
Right.
And I find myself daily having that struggle where one minute I'm like, this is awesome, and the next I'm like, oh my gosh, what have I done?
Right.
My wife, on the other hand, is very consistent and consistently faithful to say, listen, John, this is where you've been called. We got into this for a very specific purpose. God called you to buy a business in the middle of a pandemic that required you to hire people when hiring is next to impossible right now. And look at what you've done, not me personally, but look what God has done through you in the last 10 months. We've grown the business, almost doubled it now in 9 months.
Wow,
we
good.
Started with 25 clients, so we've basically doubled our number of clients. We started with about 25 caregivers, more than doubled that now. And so it's exciting, and I could very easily say, look what I've done, hey, this is awesome. But no, it's not, Dave. It's totally me saying, God, you called me to this purpose, you called me to this place, and as hard as it may be, I'm here. And I pray that you use me, and that I just hone in on what you're doing. And when I do that, whether it's a good or bad day, I can walk away at the end of the day and go, all right, I'm where I need to be, and I can trust you with that, God. So easier said than done.
Right.
Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But for my wife, man, it's like she's just solid, and
Right.
so to have her encouraging me along the way has been outstanding.
Yeah, that's good. I think the other thing that is important, faith, and then having a good spouse that.
Yeah.
Because and my wife sounds like she's similar to your wife, that she'll have her moments occasionally, but usually we're never in the dark place at the same time.
Yeah.
I say. So,
Yeah,
so,
wouldn't that be horrible if we were?
Right.
Because I can go into a hole really quick.
Right.
And I'm so grateful that when I'm at my lowest, she just is able to, like last night was a good example. I mean, I wasn't at my lowest last night, but it was a time where it was a rough day yesterday, and I'm like, man, this is really a struggle. And she came over and she sat down and she prayed for me, and she's like, we got this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're right. What am I doing here? You know, like, God, you're good. You're faithful. You're going to provide.
Right.
And so yeah, there's so much value in having that partner that is going to be that constant encouragement, and you know, for me, a prayer warrior and a faithful woman. It's just pretty amazing. Yeah.
So one thing I want to go to is most people, when they think of an entrepreneur, they think of a 20-something-year-old kid who's fresh out of college working on some tech company.
Yeah.
The reality is you're right in that sweet spot of when most people start a business. I think it's like 46 to 52, somewhere around there. So you're right there. That's where most successful entrepreneurs start around that time. Obviously, experience is a huge thing. 20-something-year-olds, even 30-year-olds, a lot of times just don't have the life experience and work experience to really understand the market and how to lead people. I think people underestimate as an entrepreneur the leadership that's required. Do you think if you started your business or bought into your franchise or done some other business earlier, you'd be seeing as much success as you have in the 10 months since you've started this?
Man, that's a great question. I've wondered that because I have started some other businesses when I was younger in my life. They were startups, and so a lot of challenges that you have with a startup that you may not have at least as much with a franchise, especially one that was already existing in my case. So honestly, you would think that with a franchise, especially one that's already existing, it's pretty much a turnkey. You jump in and you're good to go. It wasn't the case with me this time, so I will say that it wasn't as smooth as you might think it was. But I would say that if I was younger and had the opportunity to buy a franchise that had all of the mechanisms in place to ensure success, that it probably would have been a good thing for me. Because what I discovered is when I started businesses on my own, not having that structure in place, I started them knowing that I was a good salesperson, that I loved people, but operationally I struggled. And so what happened was I got into it, and although there was some success to those businesses, I recognized that I didn't have the well that was deep enough to pull from for the operation side of things. And so those kind of fizzled. And I will say that if I was younger and could have bought or would have bought a franchise that was already established or at least had kind of the blueprint for success, I think I would have been successful because I am a salesperson and I love that. And I think a lot of people that buy businesses may not be salespeople. And so that might be the hardest part for them buying a business. Like I often heard that with the company that I purchased, the franchise, that if you're not in sales and you buy one of these franchises, you're going to find that it's challenging to grow because you don't know what it's like to have to hustle. And I'm a good hustler. I get out there and knock on the doors and beat the bushes. I struggle operationally. So that's why we've seen success growing the business. And I think also why we've found success operationally is because it was already there. So to answer your question, I think, I look back, I think if I would have bought a franchise, it would have been a good thing for me. But I also think that I learned from my failures. The businesses that I started that weren't franchises, that were just startups, those were priceless experiences for me that really taught me a lot about how to be more successful when I did start another business. So I think it goes both ways.
Yeah, it's similar to, I don't know if you know the history behind Abe Lincoln. I think he lost twice or three times as many elections as he's won. Actually.
Yeah, right.
So he learned. I mean, some people just. There's obviously people that are prodigies and things come easy to them, but the majority of people, there's a learning process that needs done. You can be successful while you're still learning, but there's still a learning process.
Absolutely. I will say that I look back and I mentioned early on that my resume has a lot of jobs on it. And I really struggled with that, Dave, honestly. As I was probably in my 30s, early 40s, I was like, man, why all these job changes, And it's what's interesting is I never left on a bad note. So I've maintained those relationships with every company that I've been with, and they would hire me back today because of that relationship. And so I look back and I'm like, why did I make those changes? Well, I was always looking for the next thing to challenge me. And they were always upward trajectory positions. So I never made lateral shifts. It was always like bettering my career. And I guess my encouragement would be to somebody who's feeling like I felt, where I was almost like feeling like almost a failure. Like, here's some friends of mine who have been in jobs since they graduated from college, who are successful and blah 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 blah, and I'm like, wait a second, I'm just as successful here.
Right.
Yeah, I worked at 10 different companies, but I've also enjoyed the fruits of my labor in 10 different companies.
Right.
I've made some significant impact in people's lives in every company that I've worked with, and so I just would encourage people, if they're struggling with that, and you're an entrepreneur, don't beat yourself up. Like, go for it. If you feel stuck in a position, I think it's okay to look elsewhere and make an impact somewhere else.
Yeah, and that's very similar to me as well. So I think the longest I stayed anywhere was probably 3 years. Just because it's a similar thing, I was always looking for the next thing to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I didn't have the feeling. I was still relatively young. I started the firm when I was 34 years old, so I was still relatively young. So I bounced around a bit, but I was getting my MBA, doing different things.
Yeah.
So I didn't have that same feeling that you had. But I still had the same itch. Like, I knew from a young age that I wanted to start a business. I think I've said a few times in the podcast, I want to start a restaurant. I couldn't cook, but I wanted to start a restaurant.
That's awesome.
So the idea for the restaurant essentially ended up being like a sit-down version of a Sheetz.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to have, you could order online, and then the dream was to have a conveyor belt that would bring the food out to you. So we didn't need any staff at all.
Yeah.
Because except for like a manager. But I conceded to having staff, and it was a baseball-themed restaurant, which isn't surprising given that I played baseball in high school and college, worked for my minor league baseball team. But
that's awesome.
But I knew at a very young age that entrepreneurship was something I wanted to do. And I kick myself sometimes for not starting earlier, but then I think I wouldn't have the experience that I have now to be able to get us to where we are. There's still challenges. Operations is something I struggle with as well. I'm not a salesman. I've gotten much better at it, but I will go heads down into something and to avoid something else, right?
Yeah.
So where my strengths are, I will dig all in and get into there to avoid having to do something that I'm not sure about or I'm weaker in, and that's one of. I sometimes it's a good thing, sometimes it's a bad thing. If I can bring the people in to support that, then it's a good thing. So I can focus on what I'm good at and get better at what I'm good at, and hire people that are good at other things. But it's funny, the different path, but there's usually kind of a common theme that you're just unhappy at every job you've had. You like the job.
Yeah.
I had lunch with one of my former bosses earlier this week, and I told him, I said, there's been 3 bosses I loved working for, but I hated that job because it was a job. It wasn't a career. It wasn't a business. I didn't, like we said earlier, I didn't have the vision for what it was. It was just, I'm good at accounting, I'm going to do accounting for you. But really, entrepreneurship is where I needed to be. Mm-hmm. But I needed those experiences, I think, to get the skills needed to run the business.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
So you mentioned a few other businesses starting back to selling stuff door to door as a kid. Are there any that you want to tell us a little bit more about and kind of what ultimately ended those businesses?
Sure, yeah. No, the one that, I'll tell you the couple that I started. One was a health fair business where I saw a need to be able to give vendors and communities the opportunity to basically show up in a health fair capacity to promote their services, but do it at major corporations. And this isn't anything new, right? It's something that companies will invite a vendor in to set up shop or whatever. Well, I thought, there's teeth to having a large group of vendors coming in on a regular basis to these corporations, places like Whirlpool or other companies like that. Yeah. And giving the employees a chance during their lunch break or whatever to talk with all of these employees or these vendors that ultimately could have services that the employees could benefit from. Right. So I started that, and my goal was to franchise that or to make it big enough that I could sell that concept to other people that were interested in it. And it just, at that point in my life, it was probably more than I could chew. I bit off a little more than I could chew, and I didn't think it was going to be scalable either.
Okay.
So I felt like this isn't the right time, and it's probably not the right business. So that ended up fizzling. But the one that actually had some teeth that you probably see today isn't necessarily our company that franchised it, but is a video memorial company. What I started was a video memorial company where a lot of funeral homes, this was probably 20 years ago, maybe 15 to 20 years ago, we started this video memorial company where funeral homes were looking for an opportunity to be able to give something to the family that really memorialized their loved one. Of course, there's tons of memorial products out there. The video was basically a story of their life. It was pictures that were set to music that you would play at the calling hours and allow people to see. I'm sure you've seen that in funeral homes. It's nothing new. Back then it was a little bit new.
Right.
And so we were like just getting into it. A lot of the digital media that's available now wasn't available back then. So like we were literally delivering DVDs to funeral homes, and the family would buy 10, 20, 30 copies.
Right.
And so it actually was a great business model, but we were having a hard time scaling it as well. And while we had great success in the local area where we were in Ohio, we weren't finding success scaling it. And about the time we were starting to get ready to try and scale it a little bit more aggressively, I had the opportunity to take a position in a church as a youth pastor. So I felt at that time in my life this was an opportunity to pursue ministry, and I did that. So I kind of left that behind. My business partner tried to make a go of it, and it just didn't work out. So that was probably the one, in my opinion, that actually had the most teeth.
Right.
And as you see today, there's companies out there that are very successful in that industry now. But it didn't go that way for us.
Right.
So,
And then, so one thing we talked about before we started recording was your dad had a business.
Yeah.
So my dad was a CPA. I ended up as a CPA, ended up starting a business. Your dad was an entrepreneur, and you ended up as an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Were there lessons that you learned from him starting a business that impacted you and kind of made you want to? You said you're a serial entrepreneur that kind of put you in that kind of frame of mind, I guess.
Yeah. My dad was not a serial entrepreneur. He was a golfer. He played golf in high school, played golf in college, played golf in Division I, and was playing against guys like Jack Nicklaus and those kinds of guys. Great golfer. And he was an exec at General Motors, decided, I think in his 30s, that he wanted to purchase a golf course. And so didn't have any previous experience as an entrepreneur, but he loved the sport.
Right.
And so he's like, well, why don't I buy a golf course? I love the sport, surely I could do this. So he did. He purchased a golf course here in southwestern Pennsylvania. And I had the privilege of growing up on a golf course, like playing golf my whole life.
Yeah.
And subsequently my whole family plays other than my wife. And it's been a great sport for us. But my dad purchased this business, this golf course, and not really knowing how to run a business. And I will say that he probably wasn't the best businessman out there. But what my dad had was an ability, an uncanny ability to be able to connect with people. And to this day, people will come up to me. My dad's been dead now for 15 years. And people will come up to me to this day and say, your dad made such an impact on my life. He was a man who I loved dearly, and who to this day I remember this about him. And so what I personally gained from my dad was the need in my life to just be a kind, compassionate, and caring person. That was my dad.
Yeah.
And although my dad struggled with running a business, the operations part of it, people loved him. And that's why they came to the golf course that he purchased,
Right.
because they loved him. He was a phenomenal man.
Yeah.
And my mom too. They were in it together. But
Right.
my dad's heart for people is what I took away as the thing that I need to have when I own my own business. It's just be a kind person.
Yeah.
Don't take advantage of people, and give people the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
Chances are you're going to get taken advantage of sometimes. My
Yeah.
dad, I remember he was maybe a week or 2 weeks in to having purchased the golf course, and somebody wrecked a golf cart on the golf course. Totally their fault. You know, they ran it into the woods or something and injured themselves in the process. Wasn't my dad's fault. Wasn't the golf course's fault at all.
Right.
But they filed a lawsuit, and you know they tried to take advantage of the situation. And my dad, again, always giving people the benefit of the doubt. They fortunately won the lawsuit, so they didn't have to, you know, pay an exorbitant amount of money or whatever.
Right.
But my dad was that kind of guy. He always gave people the benefit of the doubt, even when people took advantage of him.
Right.
And I feel like when that's the way you do business, yeah, you're going to get bit every once in a while, but far more when you're a champion of others, and when you're an encourager of others, and when you believe in them and support them and encourage them in the things that maybe it's not to stay with your company forever. Maybe they have higher aspirations. If you're encouraging them along the way,
Right.
and you're championing those things, and you just are caring, kind individual, to me that's a game changer in any business. So that's probably my takeaway from my dad.
Yeah. And that is your motto too, essentially.
Yeah,
right. Like,
it is.
Yeah. So you just had someone put into words how you were living your life before that. Really.
That's exactly right. And I honestly, you know, along with that quote, I often, when I think of how I treat people, in my mind, I'm like, how would my dad treat this person right now? And my dad, when he would walk in a room, would light up a room. It was his smile, it was his laugh, it was the way he engaged with you. You just felt like you knew him forever.
Yeah.
And anybody that would tell you about my dad, if they were here, would tell you the same thing. And so I remember that, you know, like if I'm having a bad day and I'm not smiling, or I just don't feel like being around people, I just remember my dad. I'm like, what did he do? What would he do in this situation? And a smile comes to my face.
Yeah.
And you know, it just changes things when you're constantly thinking and consciously thinking of those things.
Yeah. That's great. It's nice to have that growing up with just that positive attitude, someone that's looking out for other people. It makes such a difference in your life outlook.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, as opposed to someone that's negative and looking to blame others for things or trying to take advantage of people. It's just nice to have that outlook, because I think you're right. I think you're going to be taken advantage of because there are people like that, but you're going to get tenfold, if not more, back in a positive way if you're not looking to take advantage of every situation.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not why you do it, but it's just it seems natural to me that if you're always looking to give, stuff is just going to be added to you. It's biblical, so I think that probably is why we believe that. But the Bible says if you give, it's going to be given to you, pressed down, shaken together, and overflowing. So.
Yeah. I'll say too, another thing that I take away from my dad is here he was. I'm trying to remember what grade I was. I think I was in 6th grade. It was my 6th grade summer when my parents bought this golf course. So my dad's an exec at General Motors. We live near Detroit, so you know it's like just the hubbub of all things cars and automotive, and very successful career. And he threw it all away to follow his dream. And I always respected my dad for that, especially now that I know what they went through, the challenges that they faced, even economically, with owning the golf course, that he was willing to sacrifice to buy that and follow his dream. I'll always remember that. And it's funny, this very morning, my team presented me for Father's Day. I don't know if you ever watched The Office, but one thing that Michael Scott said, he was quoting Wayne Gretzky, who said, you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take.
Yeah.
You know, then underneath it says Michael Scott. And they gave me this poster, and it's like, I love The Office, and I love that quote, but that's so true, you know? Like, I guess I would encourage people who are entrepreneurs, like, go for it, you know? I mean, I always hear people say, fail fast. You know, it's important that if you're going to fail quickly so you can move on, but go for it, you know? I guess that's something that I've always been willing to do, and take the risk, calculated and based in faith. For me as a Christian, but at the same time, go for it. And you know, I guess sometimes people are afraid to do it, but you're never going to know if you don't take the chance.
Right.
So.
And what I always think of is, what's the worst thing that happens if you have a job?
Yeah.
Especially right now, everybody's you can find a job doing anything now. So why not?
Yeah.
This is the perfect time. I think this labor market is going to be tight for a very long time. So you might as well take a risk and see what you can do.
I think you're right.
So any kind of wrapping up, any other thing that you want to say to a potential entrepreneur just to encourage them, or something that you wish you had known before you started a few months ago, or with any of the other previous businesses?
Yeah, no, I guess, first of all, just thanks again for having me on. I think it's great that you guys are doing this. It's a great opportunity for people like me to kind of maybe just blah, like I've been wanting to tell somebody this forever. So it's good for that reason. But also, I think to give other people that are maybe in situations where they're considering, should I do this? Should I not do it? So it's a good thing, Dave. I'm glad you're doing it. But as far as words of encouragement or advice, I've probably mentioned it all, but I think, one, it's worth taking the risk if you're thinking about starting a business. To your point, why not? Give it a try. And you'll never know if you don't give it a try.
Right.
And if you're an entrepreneur, there's like that itch that I've been talking about. It's probably, you're wanting to scratch it and something's not allowing you to.
Right.
Chances are you're an entrepreneur and you might as well take the chance. So that's one. And then two, don't beat yourself up. Like if you do fail, to me, failure is a good thing because you learn quickly what went wrong and you can make course corrections along the way. And I feel like I'm at a point in my life now and in my business where I'm seeing some really exciting things because of failures and because of chances that I've taken. Those are things that early on in my life I took chances, I failed, took more chances, I failed, I took another chance 9 months ago, 10 months ago. Sometimes I feel like I'm failing, but honestly, I'm seeing some great success. So I'm super encouraged by that. And I guess I just would encourage people, if you're thinking about trying something, go for it. Go for it. I do think that there's value in, understanding and taking to heart what the risks are. I'm not saying just blindly step in anything, but if you feel like, there's that itch that needs scratched, go for it.
Yeah, that's great. We appreciate you coming on, John. It's been good getting to know you and learning about not just your business, but really about you and why you started the business and your point of view. And I think we align very well on a lot of things. Even you talked about champion people. That's one of our core values, is being a champion. So,
awesome.
I really enjoyed talking to you and glad you came on the podcast.
Thank you. Well, thanks, Dave. I appreciate it, and all the best to you guys.
Thanks. That was another episode of the Businesses Start Here podcast. Thanks again to John for joining us. It was a great episode. We learned a lot about John and about his business, and really about some of the struggles and some of the ways that he overcame those struggles. So thanks, John, for joining us. And if you have anybody that you want us to interview, or you have any topics you'd like us to cover, please feel free to let us know. You can comment on their videos, comment on wherever you're listening to this podcast, or send us an email at podcast@viliati.com. We'd love to hear from you, hear how this podcast is impacting you. Thanks, and until next time, we'll see you then.
Thanks for listening to the Businesses Start Here podcast. We hope you were inspired and encouraged by today's podcast. We would love to hear your feedback. Please send us an email at podcast@viliati.com. That's podcast@vilioti.com. And be sure to share, like, and comment all of our content.